Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. I'm a men's dating, relationships and intimacy coach. And also do a lot of work with men around helping them embody healthy and positive masculinity. I think it's something that's really needed at the moment in our lives, actually. And I've got a very different episode for you this week, actually. An episode that I was really looking forward to recording because of my own personal experience inside the topic. I'm joined by Nadia Meli, and we talk about deconstructing Christianity and ex-vangelicals. So evangelical churches are, I know them as churches that are quite lively, that are quite Bible heavy, quite very literal Bible places. I grew up in my younger years going to a Pentecostal church, which is a form of evangelical church, and we explain a little bit more what that means inside the episode of Nadia. And Nadia's been a follower of my work and someone I've spoken to quite a bit around dating and so forth on Instagram. I remember one day realizing that she had, left the church and it really changed her life and so forth. So I asked her to come on the podcast and talk about it since we had some shared experiences. Her experiences go a lot deeper than mine. She went to Bible college. She really studied Christianity. She sat with theologians and taught and discussed and questioned things. And I think this episode is really interesting in just, even if you have no interest in religion, it's just understanding how we are given beliefs and often we don't question them. Most people don't question them because it's painful to question them, because it's easier just to keep on carrying living. And what Nadia has actually gone and done is she's actually questioned these beliefs she was given and then put some of the ones that really she didn't feel sat with her to one side and didn't work for her. So I think it's a really amazing episode in terms of just anyone who has been through religion and seen what it does to families and friends and all sorts, because I've seen a lot of that as I talk about in the episode. But other than that, it's a really great listen, and Nadia tells her story so eloquently and beautifully, and also really talks about how one can heal from this sort of experience, because I think often we don't jump into shifting our beliefs and changing our beliefs because we don't feel we can do it and we can't heal from the pain afterwards. And Nadia is a great example of someone who has really gone through it herself, and it's even shifted her work. She was a wedding photographer for many years, and she's now moved into portrait photography and so forth, and you hear a lot about that in the episode. So I'm not going to tell you about the episode before I tell you about the episode. Before I jump in, there's a couple of workshops as always. I've got a Tantra for couples coming up on the 28th of November. That's at 5 o'clock UK time. That is with me and Orsa. And we've run this one many times. And, it's a really beautiful one for couples to come to just reconnect with each other, to bring a closeness and intimacy, a passion back into a relationship, to something new. So if you're in a relationship, feel free to come along to that. And if you are wanting to experience Tantra, but you're single or you're solo, or you want to come alone and not with your partner, then we got another workshop for you on the 5th of December. which is at the same time, 5 p.m. And it's our tantra for singles. It's tantra for solo people. It's like our signature. I feel like it's our signature workshops. These two, we've been running them pretty regularly for the last year. So if you've been before, you know how good it is. So feel free to come again. You know, it's that enjoyable. And then I have a workshop I'm running myself, being authentically attractive, which is, you know, something I've developed recently for people who just want to, you know how to be more authentically themselves and show up in the loving and powerful and leadership focused, authentic way that we naturally are, our natural way of being. I'm not teaching you anything. I'm actually helping you unlearn some of the shitty things we've learned around dating and how we should, air quotes around that, should be. And that's on the 9th of December at 7:30 p.m. UK time. And the last workshop to tell you about before I get into the episode is how to create conscious relationship. This is a new workshop by me and also. It's on the 12th of December. And it really came out of the 100th episode that we did together, that we sat down really beautifully and recorded, where, you know, we just sat and just talked about what it took to build our relationship as it is. And a lot of people, even before that, asking us a lot of questions about that. So we decided we just create a workshop to teach you about some of the tools, some of the very practical structures we have in place. Like we have a check-in, there's questions in the check-in, how we discuss certain topics, how I stay open to listening, how she requests to be open to listening, and how we challenge each other. And we're going to talk about all these things inside the workshop. So all those are inside the show notes. If you want to come along, feel free. If you're asking questions, feel free to ask me as well about any of those, and I'm happy to answer anything. Without further ado, I'll let you get into the episode. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back with a we'll call it a holy episode, because it's going to be a really interesting conversation about something I don't talk about much, actually. I don't really get into it because I forget about it almost sometimes, you know. It's almost like I've locked it away as part of my life. As I grew up growing up in a very Christian household. I grew up in a Pentecostal house. My mum went to church multiple times a week. And I don't always think about the impact it's had on my life, my dating, my relationships, my family, all these things. But I came across our guest today on Instagram, first of all, through the photography, you know, just the wonderful photography. And I'm a big admirer of photography because, you know, I like to take photographs myself. And then started to hear her experience of being in church and leaving church. And it really kind of piqued my interest in terms of how this affects our lives, because it's something that if you've never really been inside a church, you don't realize how much this drives your thought patterns, your feelings, and your trauma as well. So today I have the wonderful guest of Nadia Meli. How are you doing?
Good morning. Hi, I am good. I'm really excited to talk to you today. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Nadia's been a big supporter of my work and Ulsa's work, and I've been a massive supporter of her beautiful photography. I'm extremely jealous, if I'm honest, because I'm like, wow, I wish I could shoot that well.
I'm sure you could. I don't think photography doesn't really have, you know, any gatekeepers nowadays. So I'm sure you could.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's the bar to entry into photography feels low, but the bar to be a really great photographer is much higher. You know, like I did a photography course for like 8-9 months a few years ago, and I still speak to my photography tutor. Actually, he's a friend of mine now, and I just like look at like your work, his work, and I'm like, wow! Just to see the world in that way is a thing of beauty, because I think a lot of people don't appreciate. Maybe because I understand what goes into photography, a lot of people don't appreciate how much goes into it. You know, how much you have to consider all the small details, the lighting, how the floor looks, and where light's coming from, where it's reflecting off. You just see a nice photo and go, "Oh, that's a nice photo." You don't think about the deeper thought.
Yeah, it's 12 years of experience and practice, and then also when you're a photographer, you're a photographer all the time, whether you're working or not. Like when I walk outside, I look with my eyes as if I see everything in photos basically. And so that's part of it too, how you grow and how you learn and how you practice. You just see everything in frames basically. So.
Yeah, it's like if you when I record these podcast episodes, I'm always interested in people, how they're laid out and their backgrounds are laid out. Whenever you see a photographer and someone who is into photography and design, when you see their background, there's always a balance to the background. You can see it. You can see there's a balance to how the room is laid out. There's just this. It's just there, evident that they see the world as these like rectangle frames all the time, constantly.
Yeah, everything. Yeah. I can't switch it off. That's just how it is. And I'm sure it's similar with other professions as well that people do, whether they're creative, obviously creative, or not so obviously creative, but people just, when you do something for 24/7, that's like how you think, right? That's how you see the world. That's how you hear everything. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I guess I'll start off with the question I ask all my guests, which is, how did you come to do the work that you do today? What was your journey?
Okay, so dive right in. How did I come to be a photographer, first of all? Always been creative. I've always been an artist, like since I was a baby. I've always been painting and drawing and creating things and building things. And my parents sent me to art school for a while and kind of wanted to support that. But I did get into photography actually quite late. Maybe like the typical photographer stories, people who were like in the dark room with their grandpa when they were 5 years old. That was not me. I got into photography when I was 19, actually, because I moved to London. I grew up in Germany. I moved to London for a gap year. And my parents gave me a small little point and shoot camera. That was one of the first digital ones that you could just easily buy anywhere. It was like this cheap little point and shoot. And that was their gift for my year abroad. And that's when I started taking photos, living in London, like street photography, photos of my work. I worked in a homeless shelter and in a youth club in East London, and I was like just shooting everything. People, streets, buildings. I mean, London obviously is full of enough like inspiration, and that's when it kind of started. Then after my gap year, I moved back home to Germany. I actually started studying, not photography. I went to Bible college. And did a degree, 3 years. But while I was doing that, I started photographing more and more people as well. Got a DSLR. And everyone kind of at Bible college, I don't know for those listening, but very, very common thing is people get engaged. College, like they go there and they, couple up and get engaged. So a lot of friends asked me, "Oh, could you take our engagement photos?" Blah, blah, blah. And then I got my degree in January. In March, I shot my first wedding, friends of friends. And from there, it kind of snowballed. That was 12 years ago. I got like just more and more bookings. The second year, I started shooting abroad. And from then on, I pretty much only did destination weddings for 9 years.
Wow.
It was a crazy life, very fast paced. While also still being completely involved, engrossed in church culture, in ministry. I was married as well, got married just after leaving Bible college. And then about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I was like, okay, something just shifted. And I kind of wanted to leave weddings. I became physically sick, mentally sick, because of all the traveling, but also I just started looking at weddings differently from before. I started losing the love and the passion for it. And even what I thought was the love and passion for photography and my work. Thankfully, that was not the case. It was just weddings and travel. And so slowly kind of transitioned out of that. I'm doing portrait photography now. Which gave me a completely new joy for photography and for connection with people. because it's actually a lot more intimate and a lot more personal than wedding photography, I find. And in the last 3 years, a lot of other things have happened as well. I left wedding photography. I left my marriage after 11 years. Left church as well. I left Christianity after 33 years. I was born in the same as you, like in a Pentecostal family, Pentecostal church. That's how I grew up. And I was fully like in it for 33 years. And so, yeah, basically everything changed in the last 2 years. Started a completely new life. So here I am.
Wow. Life 2.0.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Wow. That's a big shift, eh? That's a lot of change in a very short space of time. Was there like an order? Was it like you left the wedding photography, then the marriage, then the church?
It was all in the same time space. Like it was all in the same year. Yeah, it was crazy. It was all 2019, at the start of 2019. I still had to do 2019 was like my last wedding season. So I did a whole year of that, but I already knew like I wasn't taking new bookings for the next year. I already knew this is it. This is really it. But at the start of the year in March, I moved out of my ex-husband's and my house. And kind of around the same time, I stopped going to church as well. But obviously, there's a whole lot before that happened that led up to it. And then it was kind of all just happened at the same time. I took one step and the next, and it was like, I don't know what informed what, but I feel like the deconstruction of Christianity definitely informed the other choice as well, like to leave my marriage. And it was like a little bit of a catalyst that made everything else happen, really.
Wow. So I think the question that's on my lips actually is, what was it like growing up in the church? And we'll just frame this as that it was, evangelical church, Pentecostal church as we grew up in. And I always give my friends always like, what does that even mean? What's that look like? And I say, when you watch Borat, right? In the first Borat, he goes to church and the people are like singing and dancing. And then I think people start speaking in tongues and stuff like that. And I was like, that's what Pentecostal church is like.
Yep, that's what Pentecostal church is like. And evangelical churches, there's a whole, like there's so many denominations, there's different types. There's really conservative evangelical churches, there's more liberal ones, there's really lively ones like Pentecostal church. I also, for a number of years, I went to Baptist church. That's like the opposite of lively. At least the one I went to in Germany was like very very quiet, very calm, and very conservative. And for people who are not really sure what evangelical means, like the big umbrella term, I would say it's Bible believing churches. Like they are very, like they take the Bible, most of them, not everyone, but literally, and like live, they believe the Bible is God's word, and you have to live according to what the Bible says, even in 2021. And so they're very Bible believing and operate around that. That's kind of the foundation. And they operate around, you are a sinner, you're born a sinner, Jesus died for your sins, you need a relationship with Jesus, to have forgiveness of your sins and to go to heaven. That's kind of for me, evangelical, that word, that's what that means in that definition for me. Like it centers around that relationship with Jesus and you being a sinner. So for everyone not knowing what that is, and then there's different streams, So yeah, I grew up just like you, Pentecostal at first. My parents are from Italy, was born in Italy, and there are there's a big Pentecostal movement there actually. And I remember you mentioning in our previous chat that, you thought it was just a Black church, thing, that Pentecostal. And I'm not sure like about the origins of Pentecostal churches, but I know that they are huge in the Mediterranean and in like South America. Pentecostal churches are really, really big. I think also because it works with the culture, because it's it's
lively
loud.
people.
Yes, exactly. It's loud and it's like it works really well. So they're huge in those parts of the world. So yeah, I did grow up in a Pentecostal church, but yeah, very, very conservative stream in terms of clothing. Like women and girls had to cover their hair with a veil. Yeah, like wear skirts, and to church at least. And we weren't allowed to wear jewelry or nail polish, like all of that stuff, or red. Like weren't allowed to wear, red lipstick, red nails, or like just the color red. There was a lot of it was very conservative, very defined gender roles, very defined everything of what a woman should be, what a man should be. Very, very clear roles when I was growing up. And I kind of went with it. Like it was only like really in my 30s, I realized I could find I had the language to actually express that growing up. It was a very toxic and abusive environment, because while I was growing up, I didn't realize that it was toxic, right? Like so many people don't. They only realize that later on. They're like, hang on, this wasn't healthy. Especially the whole message centering around you're a sinner, like you are born bad, and you're actually not worthy, but also you are kind of worthy because God loves you. So it's so Christianity, as I see it now, is so schizophrenic, and it growing up, seriously, like growing up, it just messes with your head so much. And so you constantly try to be better, to be something, to be something different, and you pray and you punish yourself and you agonize over things that are completely normal, that you shouldn't be worrying about, but you learned that they're bad, that they're sinful. Anything to do with sexuality, for example, like that, things that are completely normal. They just mess people up because they tell them these things are wrong, and you shouldn't be thinking them, you shouldn't be doing them, and so forth. So growing up was, as you mentioned before, like with your mom, I was in church 3-4 times a week or sometimes more, depending on the events. I got baptized when I was 18, proper adult baptism, immersed in a lake, no children christening or anything, like proper biblical baptism. And went to Bible college, studied theology. That's actually where it got worse, where my deconstruction started, which was interesting. I got married like to a good Christian boy that everyone said, is a nice boy. I waited till marriage to have sex. Like I did the whole Christian career, and followed like the rules, and read my Bible, and worked in ministry, and prayed, and had what I thought was a relationship with God, up until things started falling apart, basically. Yeah.
Before we get into the falling apart bit, I'm interested in the gender roles part. Like, what did the gender roles look like in terms of how the church said that, because I remember growing up, and you talk about the clothing. I remember my mum not wearing makeup until about probably around 20 years ago. It was the first time I saw my mum wear makeup, right? She didn't wear makeup at all. Skirts, head covering, hats, all that to church. It was just, normal. A pair of jeans. I didn't see my mum wear a pair of jeans until I was in my 20s,
Okay.
like it was, she really lived that life. So I really saw how that kind of affected her, and indirectly affected me. But I'm interested in how the gender roles occur to you, of like what a man should do and be, and what a woman should do and be.
Gosh, yeah, with I grew up obviously with a bit of a double whammy because it was Christianity, conservative Christianity, but also conservative Sicilian household. So,
Mm.
and they do feed off each other quite well because they're both very conservative. So my parents' culture and the way they wanted to raise us was obviously like very Sicilian, but also Christian, conservative, and both are kind of very, even in still to this day, my family in Sicily, uh, there are very, very like specific gender roles. So the women stay at home; they don't have a job ever. They well, obviously, they have the job of being a mother. They have children. They stay at home. When the husband comes back home, the food is on the table, like or cooking. It's all like very. That's all very like set. This is how it works. Nobody questions it. And then with church, that added another layer of this is you have to do this. This is right because God says so, because the Bible says so. This old book that was written for a completely different culture, not our Western culture, not for our time, but still, this is what it says. And also, I mean, the Bible is not very clear at all on a lot of things, which we might get into later, but that added kind of that that's how it was justified, because it's God's will that this is how it works, because God made men and then he made a woman out of a man's rib. So, women have to submit to men. At every wedding, even at our wedding, Ephesians was read, that passage from Ephesians where, wives submit to your husbands, da, da, da. And it was kind of, that was kind of it growing up. It was like, if my dad says something or if the pastor says something, an authority figure, you don't question it. If you're a girl, you should not be too loud, and that was always my issue growing up. It was like, be more feminine, be more girly, stop being so loud, stop being so opinionated. There were many, many instances where even in church where I was like organizing things and leading ministries where people would come to me and be like, you shouldn't be doing this. Like, let a boy do this. A boy should do this. You shouldn't be leading, this ministry or this thing. You shouldn't be speaking at this thing. Boys should be like. That's another thing. Like, we had only male people on stage in church, unless it had anything to do with singing or with children. That's where women were allowed to say something. Other than that, it was men, and it was just it was just the most basic, patriarchy system that you can imagine. Like, this is literally what my life growing up was like. Very like, women are at home, men go to work, men are at the forefront, you submit, you shut up. You don't say too much, and you have to behave and look a certain way, kind of thing. Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting, for the listeners and for us, is like, this is a very similar message to the wider world that women receive, in the Western world especially, and all across the world, to be honest. I'm trying to think of cultures where it doesn't, because the Western world has basically shaped all of culture across the world now. There's not really anywhere in the world now, because I'm thinking like of my own travels, there's nowhere in the world where you can go where you're not touched by Western culture. That doesn't seem to exist anymore, When you can go to the middle of nowhere parts of India and you see a TV and it's got, I don't know, Justin Bieber on it, it's touched everywhere. But this patriarchy that really comes from the Bible, ultimately, right? This book, which, I don't know how you feel about the Bible, but my feelings are that I imagine was it the King James Bible that you were reading normally?
Well, because I studied in Germany, I grew up in Germany, it was not the King James Bible. It was like a different German translation.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. There's a lot of different translations that have very little to do with the original text. And yeah, obviously it was written by men
Yep.
in a patriarch society, Judaism, and it has, it's nothing to do with where we are today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I always point this out. It's like people go, oh, you know, the Bible, we should just what's in the Bible, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, people have been changing the Bible from the day it was probably written, right? People have been adding, removing, changing passages.
Yeah.
Kings have changed passages to suit what they want. And I think this is one of the gripes I used to have with people like, oh, you have to follow the Bible. And I was like, there's two things that bother me about this book. First of all, I don't know if this book is the same book that was originally written. I'm not disputing there's wisdom in the book, because there's some obvious, very good wisdom to be taken, right? There's that exists. First of, and then it was written by men. It was written by human beings, first of all, right?
Yeah.
So even if it was God's word, the human beings had to translate this divine knowledge, right? The most expansive and divine knowledge that was passed into them directly, right? And then they had to write it with their hands, right? And the problem is they had to process it through their brains. And they would have to process it through their brains based on the idea of, I am man, I am better than woman. Oh no, God's telling me that men and women are equal. I must be getting something confused in God's word. I am confused. So I better write it how, no, I think God is just, I'm just confused. God is actually sending me that men, you know, and it's like all these things used to trouble me. And that's the way the authority was, as you were saying, you know, the pastor says something. Oh, the pastor says, oh, the pastor says, oh, pastor says, oh, we must all listen to the pastor, right? And I'm sure we'll get on to how pastors are, because I know many a good story about a pastor these days. But there's this way in which we are not always so aware that this book has completely shaped how we view every single society and every single human being across the world, because this is the ultimate, the Bible is the ultimate patriarchy tool, right?
Yeah.
Because he created a book which is the best-selling book in human history. Yeah, let's just be clear here. You know, we have generations of this book that have been read. Like, you know, I want to talk about slavery. And it's like, how did they stop? Because initially, when, you know, this is something that's not a common fact that's known, is that when the Europeans went to Africa and were sold slaves by other Africans, right, and gave a very good price that caused them to want to sell more, slaves would just jump off the boats because they believed in transmutation of the soul. So they're like, if I kill myself, it's okay, I'm going to come back as another human and I can move on. You know, that's a good thing to do. So they devised a very clever plan. The clever plan was, if we indoctrinate them with our Bible, they won't kill themselves, because in the Bible it says you shouldn't kill yourself, right? And that will help us get them over. The Bible has been used as the greatest patriarchy tool of them all. And even though our societies are not based on it, obviously now, it's still used. It's still really reminiscent in the way that we look at men and look at women and we look at authority. And it's, you know, it's just so remarkable sometimes when I think about it. I'm just like, wow, like, it's amazing. This book has just taken hold of everything. Like, I know there is wisdom in it. I've read bits. I've never read the whole thing. I've read bits here and there. But it's amazing how this book has done what it's done. You know, it's staggering.
I know, it makes me so angry sometimes. I'm like, how did that happen? And then Christians will come and say, well, that's proof that it's God's word, because it has survived everything. It's a bestseller, as you mentioned, right? Like, it's a bestseller. It survived everything. You couldn't get rid of it. The Nazis couldn't burn it. Like, it's influenced everything. That is proof that, you know, God is behind this and not men. And it makes me really angry sometimes that it has this massive influence still today, and that people take what essentially is, you know, just something written by people, by men, and make it into this dogma, into literally a instruction for life, and use it to oppress people, use it to exploit people, to abuse people. It's a big topic. How old were you when you decided, this is it, I'm not going to church anymore? Bullshit.
I remember, and I'm gonna that was the question I was gonna ask you, so I'll answer it first. So I remember going to church as a kid. And I remember with the church I went to started off, it was in a little hall, and it's not even far from where I live now, actually. It's still not that far. I know where that little hall is, where it started, in that little hall, because we used to live on an estate in a place called Woodford Green, which is next to where I live now. And I always remember going there on a Sunday. That's my memories of childhood, going to church. And, you know, my mum's Jamaican, so everyone would come. When the church was small, so people would come to my mum's house afterwards for dinner. Then it grew, then it moved to a place called Walthamstow. And I remember just never enjoying it. I didn't like it. I've never been good with authority and rules. I just remember there's always things you should and shouldn't be doing. I found it very boring. These men getting up and, you have to listen to the word of Jesus. And when you go out into the world, you need to make sure that you are listening to Jesus. And I remember all this, and I was sitting there going, this is ridiculous. And people are eating this up.
It's an impression, obviously. Really good at this.
And I remember thinking, wow, this is, you know, and I was going to school like most children. I always had to go to church. I had to, you know, I would have been, you know, 8 to, you know, from 5 to 8, 12 years old. And I think both saving grace to a certain degree, it wasn't a whole family thing, like my grandma and stuff like that. It was just my mum that had gone to Pentecostal church. Okay. So when I got to 11, the school I was going started to do Saturday school.
Okay.
So I remember at that point going, Mum, I can't go to church because I don't have any days off. Like, I need a day to rest, you know. Even God said I need a day to rest, right? And my mum, I remember my mum being like, oh yeah, that's true, you know, that's very true. And my older sister, I think she had stopped by this point because she's 9 years older than me. So yes, I think she stopped at 16.
Mm-hmm.
And so I stopped going then. And obviously the church people used to come in the house. And my mum was still speaking about things like that. But I remember just being like, these people, they don't understand the world. They're living in this like real bubble. And I was like, oh, you know, I'm going to stay over here. They're going to do their thing. And I hated the church, actually, to be honest, right? Because to full disclosure, what happened was my mum got remarried when I was about 8 or 9 years old to a man. She knew him for about 6 months. He'd come over from Africa to study. My mum had known his sister. So my mum, the sister called my mum and goes, hey, my brother's here and he wants to go to church. Mum was like, yeah, of course. So she takes him to church. 6 months later, she's like, we're getting married. Wow. And I remember being like, what? Getting married? But I remember the conversations, hearing my mum on the phone to people, and they're saying, you know, or people coming around and talking, going, you know, you can't be living in sin. Dating is living in sin and all this. And I remember thinking, wow, that's okay. So then my mom gets remarried, and at the beginning he was really nice, right? And then very quickly become quite distant, angry, miserable man. I remember being like, oh, this guy's an asshole. So you know, it fractured our home. My mum had 2 more children, my 2 little sisters. But me and my older sister wouldn't talk to him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And by the time I was 11, 12, 13 years old, the relationship was very toxic, to the point where if the phone rang for him, we would just go, Mum, can you tell him the phone's ringing for him?
Okay. Wow.
You know? So for me, a lot was wrapped up in the church and my mum's marriage, and how they were very much like, you have to get married. And it's obviously tainted how I've seen it, because what I saw was this control, this like, you have to do what we say. Right. And if you don't do what we say, you're bad and you're wrong. And here's this book to tell you, and look, everyone else is saying you're bad and wrong. You're not living God's way. You're not living, you know, in line with what Jesus says. You know, this, you know, you can't live in sin. And I remember back at a young age just being like, no, I don't agree with this. This doesn't feel right. It never felt very right. It just felt like control. So from a young age, I kind of rejected it. And there was this story is funny. I was 16 years old, 17, 16. It was a Christmas. I used to go for Christmas. Christmas Day, I had Christmas morning, or was it Christmas Eve? I used to go to church. And I went to church. And at the time, I think I was 16 or so. And I just met my first girlfriend, right? A friend of mine who's still friends with, I'll see her tomorrow. And someone was like, David, we need to pray for you. And I remember being like, no. You don't need to pray for me. I'm cool. I came here. Let me just sit in my chair. Oh, no. Then my mom's like, oh, you can't be rude, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So I go up there, hand on head, you know, hand on the front of the head with the slight shake.
I know. Yeah.
Oh, God is showing me that
Mhm.
you are sleeping with women unprotected and doing drugs and mixing with bad people. Oh, David, you must stop this. Da, da, da. God is showing me these visions, blah, blah, blah. Now, I wasn't like, at school, I was studious, hardworking. Like, I just met my first girlfriend. We were like madly in love. I wasn't sleeping. I was still a virgin, hadn't slept with anyone. Oh my God, I smoked some weed when I was 13 years old. My mum had caught me, but I wasn't doing drugs all the time. I literally was just doing my A-levels, trying to study, trying
Yeah.
to do well because I saw that as a route to getting a good job. Because equally what I saw in the church was a lot of poor people.
Mhm.
And why were they poor? Because they were generally quite uneducated. They felt the Bible was everything, but they didn't bother to educate themselves in anything else, like how money worked. They just wanted to give all their money to the church. So I was like, it's important to understand money and not to give your money to the
Mm.
church. So when she finished praying for me, I walked straight out. I went to my mum. I was like, give me the keys to the car. She gave me the keys. I walked up the church. I got in the car and I said, I am never coming back here again. And my mum was like, what happened? I was like, I'm not telling you. You don't need to know anything. You just need to know I am never coming back here. These people are hypocrites, liars, and all they're doing is trying to predict, like, these probably weren't my words, but they're just trying to tell you that we are a certain way based on how they see the world, not how they see us. Because they used to also be, by this point, I was 16, my sister would have been like 25. They're like, why don't your kids come to church? We hope they're not out in the world doing these worldly things and blah, blah, blah. And then I eventually, after 2 days, told her, I was like, this is what she said to me. She has no fucking right to talk to me like that. She does not know who I am, what my life is. And these people are hypocrites, right?
Wow.
And my mum was like, I'll get to apologize. I was like, you know what apology can be? I never want to see these people in my house, in this house ever again.
Mm.
And that was the last time that I went to church with my mum, actually. And what subsequently happened after that, there was allegations of sexual harassment by some of the pastors. There
Mhm.
was conversation around embezzlement of money. I think even some of the people involved in the church, their sons and daughters, their houses got raided due to cocaine and drug dealing, things like this. And there was a moment, and Lord forgive me for my smugness, where my mum was talking to us and telling us some of these stories. And I said, Mum, do you remember, me and my sister out in the world with the worldly people?
Mhm.
And what have we ever done? We have been, and now the funny thing is some of these people she still knows, only a few of them here and there. Oh, they go to my mom, your kids are so good. They help you, they look after you, they've never given you any trouble. Look at them in their good jobs and blah, blah, blah. And I always think to myself, I was like, yeah, because we learn to think for ourselves.
Mhm. Wow, this is amazing. I mean, I'm bowing down to you. Honestly, like this is I love this. I am so in awe of people who like get out so young, so early on, and that you were able to you didn't have the words, like the language to articulate it, but you felt this is wrong and you followed that feeling, you followed that intuition. That is huge. That is so, so beautiful because intuition is one thing that Christianity will kill
Yes.
inside of you when you are in like fully immersed in it, and it will kill you. They will kill your intuition, literally. Because you can't trust yourself, you cannot trust your body, you cannot trust your feelings, you can only trust in the Lord your God, and not in your own what's the Bible verse? Don't lean on your own understanding. That's the one.
Wow.
Yes.
But the pastor's understanding, his understanding is strong.
Yes. That comes, he has the direct line somehow. And you do too, but it's not the same.
Not equal.
It's not the same thing. It's not equal. It's like it's all these messages within Christianity, evangelical Christianity, are so it's this, but it's also this. It's always so messed up, like, and you're constantly on the edge and thinking, but what is it? Am I worthy of love or am I not? It's either one or the other. It can't be both. Like, what is the message here? Do I have a direct line to God through Jesus or not? Like, so why do I need why do I need to go to church? Why do I need a pastor for? Like, there's so many question marks.
So many.
So many.
So for you, what was the How did it start to unravel for you? Because, you had been brought up deep into this. You were in Bible college. Bible college is like, you are studying the word of God with the men of God to preach the word of God.
Yeah. Well, as a woman, no, not to preach, but you were studying it so you could do kids ministry.
Wow.
Or just study. There was also this joke at Bible college or in churches, which is not a very nice joke, but that I'm just gonna say, this is uncensored anyway, isn't it? It's like I can say whatever I want. There was this joke that women would go to Bible college just to find a husband.
Oh, yes.
To find like a pastor to marry, a future pastor. But yeah, for me, when it started to unravel, oh my goodness. I think the one that I can really remember was when I started Bible college. That's my first memory of it actually being, of me actually asking questions that were more dangerous and more difficult. Because before that, I went to Bible college when I was 21. And before that, if what you just told, the story with someone praying over you and stuff, if that had happened to me, and it did, people would pray over me, not with the same content of what you just said, but I would be like, yeah, totally, yes. I would be like, this is from God, this is like a message, and even if it wouldn't make sense, I would just try to make it make sense, or I would be like, it will be revealed to me, whatever it means at some point, because you learn how to have amazing cognitive dissonance as a Christian. You really learn that, to be like, this doesn't make sense, but it's okay, we'll work it out. So up until I went to Bible college, I was very so devoted, and I went because I wanted to learn more. I wanted, my relationship with God to be deeper. I wanted to learn more, understand the Bible better, and ultimately, obviously, be more like Jesus, be a better Christian. And so I remember the first time where something clicked. I was like, wait a minute. I was sitting in eschatology, and our professor, eschatology is like the teaching of, the last days, Revelation, the last book of the Bible, like that. And our teacher, I don't know how and why he was mentioning that, but in a side sentence, he said, well, and Adam and Eve probably were not real historical people. And he kept talking. And people listening right now would probably laugh at this. But me, little baby Nadia, Christian, was sitting there thinking, what? Like, what do you mean? They were not real people. And I was like, I remember that moment so well. I was like looking at my classmates thinking, did anyone else hear that? What what did he just say? And then I started realizing in the whole of 3 years when I was there, that a lot of things that in church on stage are presented as facts and as truth, behind the scenes, theologians actually don't believe a lot of them, and they don't agree on very much, and they're not sure of a lot of things. Theologians who are, they say they're born again Christians, they're all the whole thing, but they don't agree on a lot of things, and they're not certain of a lot of things that in church though are presented as this is the truth. I've never ever growing up in 21 years, I had never heard before in church that Adam and Eve maybe were not real historical people. I'd never heard that.
Yeah.
That story was always like, this is how this happened. Like, this is, and it's weird and it's a mystery, but for a God that is omnipotent, everything is possible. You don't question it. Of course, if it's God, if he is supernatural, then he can do anything, right? So he can make the whole world out of two people, whatever, out of nothing. And I remember starting to question then. I was like, okay, if Adam and Eve were not real historical people, I assume you're familiar with the story, right? Yeah, with the fall and, the apple and sin entering the world. I was like, if that didn't actually happen, and the fall didn't happen, then what do we need Jesus' sacrifice for? That, like, if you follow that thought, oh, they were not really historical people, how can you still believe in the core message of Christianity then? That doesn't make any sense. And that was the first time where I got really scared, actually, of my own thoughts as well.
Yeah.
I was like, how, wait a minute. if this,
you're not allowed to question it either, right?
yeah. Up until that point, I didn't. And I was like, if this is not true, what else is not true? And from there, I went down a rabbit hole and I started asking more questions. And I was like, in Bible college, to some extent, you can do that. You know, you can ask really tough questions. You can have amazing discussions, and people won't immediately judge you or look weird at you like they would in church, because it's that environment of, like, you know, digging and discovery. And it was interesting. And I actually liked it. I enjoyed those 3 years a lot. But yeah, it was then when everything started unraveling. And still, I was 21, and still, like, for another decade, I was still in it. I was like, because you know, my friends, my whole social network, my family, my husband, everything was in church. And so even I tried to raise questions with friends and, like, thoughts and, like, but it would always be like, okay, don't end up on the slippery slope. You're going too far now. You're going too far. Like, it's fine to question and to doubt, but this is too far. So I always, for like a decade, I had all these questions that were building up, and I was studying and reading and listening to things and gathering information. And then, yeah, like 3 years ago, it all kind of blew up in my face.
Wow. I always feel like if there's any knowledge or information that can't stand the test of being questioned and still stand up, right, as truth in some way, then you have to be very fearful, because then it's not information, it's orders, right? They can't be questioned. Absolutely. And I think that's the thing with a lot of churches. Like, you're not allowed to question the word of God or the pastors and stuff. And there's a history of that, isn't it? Because when you go really far back, originally they didn't even let the people read the book, right? They couldn't read. So it's easy to control people if they can't read, and you just tell them, I've read it and I can read, and I'm telling you what it is. And obviously, as time has progressed, people can read. So I guess they also added in that bit, don't question it. You can read it, but don't question it, right? This this is holy word that you can't understand.
Yeah.
So as you were started to question, and you said it started a decade before you actually left. How did that start to affect your relationships with your family? And also, because you got married and you were in a Christian Pentecostal married for how long?
11 years.
11 years.
Yeah.
So how did that affect all of those relationships?
I think I started becoming known as, like, the troublemaker in my relationships, in church. I started to be more vocal about things. I was, like, getting called into the pastor's office.
Wow.
Being like, I remember I was like 26 or 27 for something that I had said, and about, what was it about even? I don't know, I think head coverings or clothing. I was called into the office, and he was, like, trying to talk to me. And very quickly, actually, I realized this man knows nothing. Like, I know more than this person. Like, literally, he was a pastor, but he hadn't studied the Bible. He hadn't done Bible college or anything. So I could easily talk him, like, talk over him if I wanted to. And I think I did, because I was like, I was still very much, like, in that mindset of I'm going to prove you wrong. I have to be right, kind of thing. And I started to be that troublemaker with my friends. I remember there were lots of instances when we lost a friend, like a friend of ours passed away, for example, and everyone was doing this thing where they were saying, you know, it's all God's plan, it's God's plan, and this and that. And I was the only one saying, no, this, how is this? He was very young, a friend of ours, and how is this God's plan? And I was like really rebelling against it. And I remember there was a time where a few of my friends didn't talk to me because they were like, you're being really annoying. You know, you're just like, just accept it, accept that this is how it should be, and you can't question it. And I'm like, but even Jesus questioned God when he was dying on the cross. He said, why have you forsaken me? Like, while Jesus was dying, he was questioning God. Why can I not question God? You know, even Jesus did it. And I was still like a Christian. But I was constantly like, so the relationships got, you know, they got more difficult. And being in church got more difficult. And what got really difficult was listening on a Sunday morning, listening to someone preach on stage. Like I can only describe it. It was very physical. Like I had like a very physical reaction, where I felt like everything inside turned. Like sometimes I had to walk out. I couldn't listen. I couldn't listen to people preach anymore because I was like, there's something so wrong about this, but I didn't know what. My marriage was affected in the sense that with deconstructing Christianity and actually deconstructing all kinds of theories and dogmas and rules and laws, I started deconstructing marriage as well. And I was also doing therapy because our marriage our relationship from the very beginning, it wasn't like a union of love. It was just a trauma bond, very, very much a trauma bond. So there was another thing, you know, it wasn't like we're so in love. It was very traumatic. So we were very unhappy together, very unhappy, very miserable. So I started looking at marriage not from that point of view, but God put us together, you know, this is God's will. And what God, you know, puts together, you know, you should not separate. I started looking at it from a more sober point of view and being like, but marriage is, if you believe in the creation story in the Bible, even if you believe in that, there's no mention of marriage. Marriage was created by people. It's a cultural thing. It was created as a business transaction. God just made two people. You know, I don't believe that, but if you read that story, it's not like God made the institution. God just made two people, right? So where did marriage come from? And why do I think it's a Christian thing? And Christianity does this very well. Christianity hijacks a lot of things and then says that they did it. Like they do this with marriage, with family. You know, when people say family is a Christian value, it's like, no, it isn't. Family is just a natural thing. Family has always happened, you know, families were always made. Like who made Christians like the CEOs of family? Like it's a Christian thing. Marriage is a Christian value. No, it's not. It was literally created as a business transaction.
Yeah.
And Christians just hijack things and say, this is a Christian value. And so I started deconstructing that, and that kind of affected especially like, the last 3-4 years, like before I left my marriage, it really affected like how I viewed marriage and my courage to leave. Because I mean, I stayed for so long because I thought I can't do that. Like divorce is a sin. I can't leave. This is not an option. So only because I deconstructed the actual theology, only because I deconstructed the facts around it, I was able to leave actually.
That's interesting you say that, because you know you had the opportunity to go to Bible college, you know, and that's a deep study of the Bible, right? And very, very few people get to do that. And as you said, you get into discussions and you can question things and stuff like that. So you gained a higher level of knowledge and a depth of knowledge as well of the Bible, which enabled you to then question it, which is not what most people experience. They don't get that experience because they just take what they're told and they take what they read and go, this is the word, and they completely act through that. And I thought it was interesting you said about your marriage just being a trauma bond.
Yeah.
And I've often felt, and this is really a feeling, I have no evidence of this, that the church, particularly the way that when it's very indoctrinated, it's like it's very much a trauma institute.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting you say that. I 100% agree. Yes. And it's also a place where trauma just often gets perpetuated because you are not taught to deal with it. You're taught to pray.
Yes.
You're taught to just hand it over to God. This is what I was told for a long time when I spoke to people like really embarrassed about my marriage, and people would just say, just pray. Have you prayed? Have you told God about it? I'm like, duh, of course I have. Like, people were mentioning it as if it was like something new. I'm like, of course, I've been praying like forever for this. And whatever the issue is, instead of going to the root and advising people to seek therapy, to seek help, and whatever it is they need, it's like, let's pray about it. And oftentimes it's quite dangerous. People are going to counselors in church that have no education and experience in psychology, counseling, therapy. They just literally use the Bible to counsel people. And yeah, as you can imagine, there's so much abuse and super just wrong things happening there when people treat traumatized people with the Bible. In terms of like, well, your spouse cheated, well, let's pray about it. And what did you do? What can you do to change the situation? And so many stories. I mean, there's so many crazy stories from church, but it's, I think calling it a trauma institution is not far off. Yeah, unfortunately.
And it's funny you say that bit about the cheating, because that was what's caused my mum's divorce. So her husband, my younger sister's dad, he was cheating. And the response that she got from people in the church, and also some of our family members who weren't church people, was very much like, oh, it's okay, we'll pray, and then it'll stop. You can forgive him.
Yeah.
And I remember I was the one that kind of, not to get into the details, but I came across the information at the age of 15, but didn't really know it was information. But I just knew there was something wrong when I explained to my mum what I'd heard.
Yeah.
I saw a look in her face I'd never seen before, and I don't think I've ever seen since. And it was very much the church were like, no, you just make it work. You have to make it work. My grandma, who's not a church woman at all, was very much like, this is how men are.
Yeah. My grandma was the same. My grandma would say the same things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I saw for myself at that moment, like, and if I'm honest, like, I lost a huge amount of respect for my mother in all of this, because I was like, you're allowing these people to control you, and this is very, very bad, because you're affecting relationships and stuff like that. And it was, we were her children, and I was starting to get into a point where you're 15, you start to see the world and start going, oh, wait a minute, how do I want to live? How you're living doesn't really work, and so forth. And the church does just want you to perpetuate staying there. Basically, they just want you to stay there, and they want, it's a big kind of it's a big Ponzi scheme, basically. The church, get your other friends to come and have more babies so that we can stay in and we can grow and get bigger. But there's a lot of trauma that hangs around there.
Thank you.
And I want to change. No, you're welcome. Thank you. I want to change tact a little bit, because I'm really interested in how you're living in the church and the church world for so long has affected your view upon your own sexuality and relationships now that you're not in the church, and you're because I know you're out in the world now. but you keep using this term, out in the world, and the reason is because inside of church they basically say anyone who is not in church is out in the world, basically. And that's like saying you are living in sin. Anyone outside the church is out in the world, and the world is dangerous, full of evil, rapists and murderers and killers and fornicators, and that's being out in the world.
Yeah.
So when I say that that term out in the world, that's what I'm meaning. So I'll repeat the question. Now that you've left the church and you're outside of it, how is your relationship to things like sexuality, to dating, to relationships?
Oh, it's like I'm learning how to walk at 36 when other people are already running, and have been running for decades. I'm like learning how to walk now. I've never dated. Growing up the way I did with conservative Christianity and also conservative Italian parents, dating was not a thing. Also, I think it culturally, so in Italy, but also Germany, where my parents immigrated to, the term dating, I didn't hear that word until I was about 20. Like,
Wow.
it didn't, it's more like it came over from America. It wasn't really a thing in Italy or Germany that you would date different people. I'd never heard of it, literally. You like someone and then you date that person. That's it. Like, it's kind of, I didn't have a concept of what does this dating thing mean, to date different people and kind of shop around for what you want. What does that mean? So I'd never done that. I had a boyfriend for 8 months in church when I was like 19, and then that ended, and I did my gap year, and then after my gap year I met my ex-husband, also in church, and that was a beautiful, delicious trauma bond, like textbook trauma bond. Growing up, I was very I grew up with very emotionally distant parents. And I have a very much an anxious attachment style. My ex-husband was very avoidant, so it was like, oh, take me. Like, basically, I met him and I kind of pursued him because that is what I knew, and that is how I understood love. If someone ignores me, if someone doesn't treat me that well, if someone keeps a distance between us, that's love, because that's how I grew up. And interestingly, the first boyfriend I had when I was like 19, he was the opposite. And I was like, I ended it after 8 or 9 months because I was like, this is, it felt weird because I didn't understand it. Like, he was actually really amazing. And but my little young trauma brain didn't understand that, unfortunately. So growing up, anything to do with sex was not discussed at home. Even when we did marriage prep, sex was not discussed with our pastors at all. Wow. Like, we were going in as virgins and nobody spoke about it. Like, nobody said anything. Nobody gave us any like resources or anything. Sex was not discussed really. It was always, you could always sense it's shameful. It's a topic we don't talk about. If there was anything on TV, they would switch the channel. Yeah. We were very much shielded from it. If anything was discussed in school, my parents tried to like take us out of school, or like there was no sex education at home. I was like 17 or 18, a boy from school, he wanted to like take me for a hot chocolate, and he came to our house to talk to my dad and ask, like, and my dad was like, "You're very nice, but no." He was like, I didn't go on dates, nothing. Anything that had to do with sex and your body was like, just tuck it away, just pretend it's not there until you get married. Just ignore you're a sexual being. I do remember whenever I masturbated, I felt so ashamed. Like, I felt so, and I still have, which breaks my heart now, like, diary entries of like writing how bad I am and asking God for forgiveness for doing that and for feeling that, which now just breaks my heart. Something that is so normal and healthy to be told that it's wrong, and that you're doing something wrong. So I grew up like completely disconnected to my body. It was a different thing from me. I grew up like in all these pieces, and I'm now learning how like to become whole, right? So even like getting married, like our wedding night was awful. I hope my ex-husband doesn't listen to this. But it was awful, and it wasn't. And having sex was not easy. Like even after months, like it was very, very difficult and painful. He had his own shame around it, and he didn't like to talk about sex at all. So we didn't speak about it either within our relationship. We didn't really speak even until the end. Like it wasn't like he really struggled to talk about it, even though in the last few years before we ended it, like I was like very open to talk about it, but there was just no chance. There was no communication. And now I've been by myself for 2.5 years now, and it's been so beautiful in terms of like discovering my own body, in terms of becoming whole and like connecting the pieces, and realizing I'm really disconnected from my body, from trusting it, from feeling it, really disconnected. And I have to learn how to connect with myself. And it's also been really frustrating sometimes and exhausting to do this work at my age. I mean, I know I'm not like super old, but it feels sometimes really embarrassing, when you have 18, 20-year-olds who just like sleep around, or I mean, not even just sleep around, but it's just a very normal, natural thing. And you have to kind of learn to feel yourself into your own sexuality, sex with other people, and trusting myself as well, like in certain situations. It's like, how does my body feel? Is this okay or is this not okay? I literally have to learn that now. And so, yeah, it's really fascinating. And as you can imagine, yeah, there's a whole range of emotions. It's like, it's good, and it's also really tiring and a lot of work. So yeah, it's all kinds of emotions.
It sounds like, I know how the church is around sex. My
Yeah.
home wasn't too different. I have a lot of friends who are Muslim, and we
Mhm.
often joke because it's a very similar existence.
Yeah.
I said, oh, when sex used to come on the TV or any sex scene, and magically we'd all start talking about something on the wall on the other side of the room, and then the TV would change, and then we would pretend like it never happened.
Yeah.
It was like that, and sex education didn't really come in any way. I never talked to my mum about sex at
Yeah.
all. It never got mentioned. I feel quite blessed that I was very inquisitive about sex from a very young age.
Mm.
I remember picking up porn magazines and stuff, like, because that's what you did then, because there wasn't any like internet. And then when I started to get into, say, 17, 18, I just started to watch TV shows. Like I remember there was a show called Sex Tips for Girls, but I remember it being called that. I remember watching it and being like, oh, there's all these things, because I couldn't get this education anywhere else. And luckily I didn't turn to porn for my education. But I know that working with a few clients who have a lot of shame around sex because they were told it's bad. Your desire is bad and wrong. Your desire for sex is bad and wrong, and it makes you bad and wrong. You're sinful, you're dirty, you're disgusting. And this usually is, I've had Catholic clients and I've had quite a few Muslim clients as well, guys. And it really takes time to deprogram that, because it gets very deep into our being, because not every moment of the day, but every day you have some sort of sexual desire occur for you, right? In some way you feel some desire happen. And often our first reaction is because we've been programmed into, it's like desire, bad, wrong, push down, don't feel. Because if I feel that, then I am out in the world, I am sinful and wrong. And I guess the question I'm thinking is, how have you, because I think this is something that we could all learn from, how have you gone about starting to, there's a new phrase I keep saying, it's like sandpaper off the shame, because you don't smash it into pieces like a rock and then it disintegrates. You sandpaper it down slowly over time.
I think this is maybe a bit different for me than for other people, because as we said earlier, like, you know, with studying the Bible, there's people who leave Christianity or any religion. They leave it because they're just like, oh, this is stupid, or they're fed up, or, you know, something, they have a feeling, right? And they just follow that and they leave at whatever age. But because they've been indoctrinated, and this is not everyone, but some people, because they've been indoctrinated, those things still are in their minds and in their bodies. And they still, like, I get questions from people who say, I left church, you know, everything, I feel amazing, but I'm still afraid of hell. Like, how did you get over that fear? And for me, because I didn't just leave like that, I deconstructed all the topics, you know, like, what about this topic and this and sin and redemptive violence and like I deconstructed everything. I deconstructed hell. So like the whole history, when did it first, you know, pop up, like the term, and what did it mean in Judaism and what does it mean in Christianity? And so I deconstructed that. So I'm not afraid of hell. For me, like, it doesn't exist. It's not real. But because I went that way, you know, I kind of deconstructed the theology around hell and came to terms with, like, this is not real, this is not true. So with shame around sex, it's similar. With deconstructing sexuality and like what I was taught and what actually, you know, is the reality and the real experience of people, the real world experience. Because I deconstructed that, I was able to, in my head, and this is like theory, right? In my head, I don't feel any shame. Like, I know, like, this is completely unhealthy. This was completely toxic, and I'm not doing anything wrong now. You know, it's all good. But I think our bodies, like, are different and they need more time. So even if in my head I know, like, I don't feel shame, or like I don't think, I'm not embarrassed of you know, having sex or dating or anything like that, or having thoughts or feelings around sexuality. I'm not embarrassed. Like, I know, you know, it's fine, it's all good. This is a natural, normal thing. But my body sometimes reacts differently because it's so deep. I mean, yeah, it was 30 years. So it's ingrained so deeply. And I think, for one, therapy really helps. That really helps. It helps if you can find also a therapist that knows a little bit about religious trauma, because religious trauma is real, it's a thing. And not every therapist knows what to do with that. Or just generally someone that is specialized in trauma is helpful. So therapy definitely helps. And then what also helps me is as exhausting as it is dating. It is adding new experiences to my life that prove my old beliefs wrong. That's what is helping me to heal and to shave off that, as you said, that shame, and to reprogram my body, really. Like, because I know all of this in my head now. I'm like, yeah, I know, but it's more work to let it sink in and also feel it and put it into practice. So actually dating has really helped with that element too, and adding like new experiences and being like, oh, so if I have casual sex with someone, and like I don't feel, I'm not feeling anything bad, I'm not feeling any shame, I'm not feeling evil, I'm not feeling used. It was like, you know, a beautiful consensual experience. Like, so this, what I learned is not true then, right? So it's kind of, you add new experiences that prove that old system wrong, if that makes sense. So that's what really helped me. And also taking your time, if anyone listening is like in a similar situation, to just go about it in your own pace, and not listen to what people say you should do, you know, like, oh, you should go out there. Like, because even the year I left my marriage, people were like, oh, you should sign up on dating apps, you should go out there, you should do this. And I didn't, because I knew I needed time for myself. And I was really scared at that point. And I was like, really, yeah, not in a good place. So do it at your own pace. and add new experiences to your life that you were taught are wrong. Just slowly adding them one by one and seeing how you feel, because that's kind of what's making me trust myself more and more now. I have to do these things. I have to take these steps. I have to experience them by myself. Otherwise, I will never learn how to trust myself. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I'm sitting here and I'm really just engrossed because, this is really engaging conversation for me, but also because, as you say, it's a really slow, gentle process and I'm hearing that there has to be a lot of self-compassion as well inside of this, and also for other people. But the thing that I'm really getting, what's really coming through, is this real openness as well, because one can try and create new experiences that contradict the ones we've had before, or go against the ones we had before, or make us question the ones we had before. And this is like a huge central piece of the work I do, coaching, because that's often a lot of what we're doing is going against, okay, what's this thought, idea, anxiety, fear that we have here? And let's see if this is true in the world. But what I'm really hearing with you is like, you've got a real openness, right, to accepting something else, because sometimes people have a trouble actually accepting something new because part of them is still really hanging on to their old beliefs, and in a kind of safety net way, it keeps them safe. They know it because everything else would be unknown. But what I'm really hearing is like, there's a real openness to stepping forward into the unknown and being willing to say, okay, I want to take on some new beliefs. I want to see what the world is really like out here, outside
100%.
of what I was taught.
100%. And I think I know this from myself and talking to other ex-vangelicals, when you have lived with certainty, in quotation marks, certainty, for so long, with one truth, and learning there's just one truth. And this is all, it's black or white, like there's no in between. When you've lived like that for so long, certainty almost becomes, or like, let's put it that way, like now living with uncertainty for me, it doesn't scare me anymore. It's like, it feels actually really freeing. I'm not scared of it. Whereas before I used to be scared of uncertainty growing up. And now I'm kind of scared of certainty a little bit, or when people are like very, very like, in their boxes, very convinced and I'm like, I'm always like in the gray now a little bit. And yeah, definitely very open to changing and reprogramming my brain and all that conditioning, for sure.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's so important for us to be that way, to see that the messages we get in our childhood or adolescence or 20s are not working for us. They're not allowing us to be whole and complete and live full lives that we want. And then to be also then say, I'm willing to let go of this and do something different.
Yeah, 100%. It's like you mentioned before, we're told the world out there, the people who are of the world, they're evil and they're all bad. That's how I grew up as well. Like I was told, if you don't know Jesus, you can't really love. It's not possible. Yes, you will find some nice people out in the world, but they don't really know love if they don't know Jesus. And I found now that the complete opposite. In the last few years, I found like, wow, it's like before I saw the world in black and white, and now everything is color. And it was all just conditioning and lies. And yeah, it takes a while to acknowledge that. It's also a grieving process, to be honest. There's a lot of grieving of identity and grieving a God that you thought, you knew. It's a lot of grieving. And I do want to add one thing about, just because I know some people will say that, I do want to mention, like, talking about sex in church, actually, growing up in church, we were actually told sex is holy and sex is sacred.
Wow.
So we weren't explicitly told, oh, sex is bad, or sexuality is bad. If it was mentioned in church or in a youth Bible study, it was always said, sex is sacred. It's so holy. that it has its place, and because it's so holy and so special and so sacred, God wants it to happen only in the frame of marriage. And that's, you don't exit that frame. If you exit that frame, it becomes something, dirty and something wrong, and then it becomes sinful. So again, there's this messiness, there's this schizophrenia, like which one is it? It wasn't said that it's bad, it was that it's holy, but then it was treated as if it actually is sinful, though, if you step out of the box. So there's a lot to unpack and unlearn there as well. But I'm really grateful that nowadays there's so many resources for people who leave Christianity or any religion, really, because as you said, they're all pretty similar, especially the big three. I call them the big three. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they're very similar, and I get a lot of messages from people who also leave Islam, and they have the same stories pretty much. It's not much of a difference. So I'm really grateful for anyone that steps out and like shares their story about just like, it's literally like starting a new life 2.0, as you said.
Yeah. What resources do you recommend to people?
I've linked a lot on my Instagram as well, but I found a big community through podcasts. The first ex-vangelicals I found were Americans. As always, like they were the first to like read, or I'm sure they were not the first to talk about it, but like publicly, like anything public official that I could find was podcasts at first. And then I read a lot of books, started following a lot of people on Instagram, started talking about it more. And the more you talk about it, the more people you find. Like people come out of the woodworks and are like, hey, me too. And I'm really scared, and I'm scared to leave, or I'm scared to say anything. Because it is scary. You're leaving family, friends behind and everything. And so yeah, podcasts and books were the first how I connected to this huge community, because now ex-vangelicals are a massive community. But podcasts and books was how I found out about it, how I found there's a word for this as well. And there's a whole community, and definitely therapy, If you've left any like dogmatic environment, even if you think you're fine, there's probably some trauma hidden in there. So I definitely recommend therapy. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. I feel like we could talk about this for hours, and I could just
bring
my sister in, and she would add some more into this. And I think this is
so much. Honestly, this topic there's so much to talk about. Like you can go so in depth, and yeah. I mean, obviously, I here I wouldn't like go into the theology of everything, but I love doing that too. Especially with Christians, because they think you leave because you just wanted to sin. You just
fancied a bit of sin.
Yeah, you just wanted to do what you want. That's why you left. And you're like, no, actually, most people that I meet in the deconstruction community are people, they took Christianity so seriously. They really, really wanted this to work. They really wanted to know. And they actually know more about the Bible than other people oftentimes. And they really dig in. And they were really serious about it. It wasn't because, they just wanted to be out there sinning. That was not the motivation. But I do get that a lot. You'd be surprised. Yeah.
Out there sinning. We just want to be out here sinning.
Yep.
Oh man.
Yeah, but yeah, there's loads to talk about.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you for this. Dipping our toes in this subject. It's been Yeah, it's been really beautiful to actually even tell some of these stories I've forgotten about, and I imagine the listeners are probably, it's piqued their interest. Is this something you're going through? You're listening to this and this is something you're going through. I guess people are wondering where they can find you on the internet, see your beautiful work.
They can find me on Instagram at Nadia Meli. Very simple. If you're interested in like photos and some personal stories here and there and sharing about, anything and everything really. Then it's Instagram or my website. Website is mostly for photographers. If anyone here is interested in photography, I also run a photography course. On my Instagram, I mix my work with my personal life, so you get a good picture of what I do and what I think and believe and who I am. If we connect on there, yeah.
And I have to highly recommend Nadia's writing. Actually, it's very, very captivating. Your writing is really beautiful. I really enjoy reading your posts. Sometimes you see a post and you read it like, oh, that's really beautiful, and then you forget to like it, and you forget to write anything. I do that so often. So because I know as someone who, when you spend time writing, but yeah, the writing is really beautiful. Really.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. This has been really fun for me too. And I would love to know more about like your background and your story. And I was thinking like, while you were saying that, I actually should have you on my podcast. Oh yeah, guys, I also have a podcast, by the way. It's called The Signature Boss. And I kind of talk to people on there who do their own thing. They lead life and business with integrity and honesty, like going their own path, even if it, it's not popular or it doesn't make sense to other people. So I'd love to chat to you on that one.
Oh, I'd love to. I'd be absolutely honored.
Let's turn this around. Let's do this.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Nadia, thank you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your openness and hearing your story.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks.
And listeners, if you enjoyed the episode and you want to let us know what you've learned here, something you've taken away, maybe something you'll be able to change in your life. Maybe you've looked at, your own shame around sex, or maybe you're seeing how your own growing up in some religious household or of some type has affected you. Please, reach out, send me and Nadia a message on Instagram or email, whatever. I know we would both be more than happy to have a chat and listen to you and talk to you.
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to direct people to resources, where they can get help and find more community in this ex-evangelical world, because you can feel quite lonely at first. But there's so many of us. So I'm happy to help if anyone needs any more details.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nadia. Thank you, listeners. I'll be back with another episode next week.